Welcome to Diabreadic, Highs and Lows, Life Alongside Diabetes. A short series where I talk to my family about living alongside a chronic illness and their experiences with me and memories of growing up with this diagnosis. This week we'll be talking to our co-host, Stephen Horrocks, husband, bread connoisseur. We'll start out our conversation talking about our black pepper cheddar bread.
Our favorite. It's
so good. We've given it to so many people and everybody always dies.
I've seriously been waiting to talk about this one. So.
So let's talk about this bread.
Yes. Oh, okay.
I'm trying to remember the very first time you made it because I think we were both very shocked at how good it tasted.
Yeah. I mean, and I shouldn't have been so shocked at how good it tasted because it is, first of all, bread. It has a pre-ferment, so it's a little more complex flavor, but a bunch of cheddar cheese, like a bunch of
like
cheddar.
A whole pound, right?
Yes. No, well, no, it's not a whole pound. It's a half a pound.
Oh, half pound.
But
a whole
loaf.
block of cheese.
But, a whole block of cheese. A half a pound of cheese is a lot in one loaf of bread. But then that fresh cracked pepper, oh my gosh, it's so hard to even like describe what it does.
Yeah, it's like melting in your mouth, but crispy on the edges because when cheese gets that, it's almost like when you make a cheese sandwich and you get that crispy cheese on the ends.
Oh my gosh, it's so good. And so you get the
I feel mean talking about it on here because everyone's going to want to be eating it.
But the thing that's surprising about cheese bread, and this kind of goes across the board, and so if you're interested in making cheese bread, you can kind of do this part of the process with a basic loaf of bread, and it'll change some of how the interior is. If you mix in shredded cheese with the like flour and into the dough itself so that it's totally distributed throughout instead of like rolled in or set on top or whatever, all of the oils from the cheese, and then also there's like this stuff going on with the proteins too, but all of those oils get baked into the bread, and so it's so soft and moist and just unreal.
I wish you could see Steve talking about bread. His hands are like he's a hand talker.
Big time. And we've referenced that before, but when I get talking about breads like this, I feel like I become more Italian the more we talk about bread. But so this recipe comes from Bread Illustrated, and this is published by Cooks Illustrated / America's Test Kitchen. And I honestly don't remember how we got this book. I know that it was a gift.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the context. It might have been like a Valentine's Day gift from you, actually.
I'm always buying Steve bread or books or cooking utensils or cookware. Yes. It makes it easy to buy you gifts because I just know.
Yeah, it's easy. I mean, because I'm going to love it.
I mean, easy, except he's very particular about the type of things. So I have to like research among certain areas. Anyway.
Fair enough.
We're getting into.
But so this book is phenomenal. Highly recommend it. We have made so many breads from this.
Yeah, it has great pictures in it to kind of show you through the process, which is really great.
And for anyone who's
I'm a visual learner.
Yeah. And for anyone who's familiar with America's Test Kitchen in general, this very much fits with the kind of goals and scope of what they do on their YouTube channel or subscription based on their website and all that kind of stuff. And so it's super easy to follow, and they make what are usually fairly complex and really delicious foods, in this case breads, really accessible, widely accessible. So highly recommend Bread Illustrated. But this recipe just nailed it.
Yeah, make it.
It's perfect.
It is. I mean, if you're new to making bread, it is doable. I, at one point, made it, and I mean, it's scary when you initially start making bread because you think there's just so many variables to what's happening and you don't really know what you're doing. But this recipe's great for early first-time bread makers.
Yeah, especially since it includes a lot of processes that are part of much more complex bread making, but the way that they go about it in the book makes it really accessible, and so it's a good entry point. Like I mentioned, and I think this is one of the key points to some of the flavor. Obviously, we talked about how the inclusion of cheddar here changes the texture and the inside and the flavor of the bread. The other major part of that is that they include a pre-ferment. Now, what a pre-ferment is a small amount of dough, more or less, very highly hydrated dough. So it's just water, flour, and a tiny bit of yeast. Stir it together and leave it to sit for hours. Usually overnight, long time, 12, 16 hours, sometimes a little bit more depending on what it is. They say that oftentimes these can sit at room temperature for as much as a day. And so you mix it ahead before you go to bed. The next day, whenever you get around to it, put it into the mix that you're making with the bread. And that little bit of extra fermentation adds an unbelievable complexity to the flavor, and it also changes the crust a little bit, and so it gets a little crispier, a little more,
which is what you
brown.
want.
So again, highly recommend. We'll put a link to this book on our show notes, and go check it out.
All right, so to start off this little mini series we're going to be doing, a little bit of sort of background, I guess.
Yeah.
I've been wanting to kind of document in some way kind of experiences in my life with diabetes, and it's been years that I've just been thinking about it. And sometimes writing things down, sometimes thinking, maybe I'll write a book someday. So it's emotional. So, bear with us as we work through kind of how this is going to play out. But I just thought it would be interesting to interview people who live alongside my diagnosis with diabetes. Diabetes is such a life-changing diagnosis. And so much of that I don't think is ever, talked about amongst people who are living with you and living, alongside your experiences. So I thought it would be great to kind of talk, we talk all the time about the famous stories and things, and we'll touch on those, but kind of giving room for my family to talk about it as well, because we often talk about how I feel and how, my experiences are living with it, but I thought it would be great to kind of touch into that. So, here we are today. I'm going to start with Steve. Hi. Kind of flex my interview abilities. Steve's usually the interviewer.
Yep.
So, hopefully, I can live up to his
well, and honestly,
great interviewing skills.
It's a little intimidating being on the interview of the conversation because I haven't told
him what I'm going to ask him. So,
and I've very rarely been in the position of interviewee in this kind of scenario. So.
And I need to practice letting other people talk. So let's start off with, what are your first memories of me and my diabetes, and, early memories or experiences?
So I've been, thinking about this because we've been talking about doing this project for a while in different formats. And then this idea of having a mini series as part of the podcast, we've been tossing around for a few months now. And so it's been in the works. I never actually thought about that in terms of myself as one of the guests or interviewees, though. So, but it is interesting because I don't remember my first memory of your diabetes or like treatment devices, because that's often how the conversation kind of opens up, right? And I feel like the second time we met, it came up somehow. And we're not going to talk through our whole like meeting story and all that. That's a different kind of show. But the second time we met, I was there at your house and we were just sitting on the front porch. It was summertime. You were kind of wrapped up in a blanket. I was sitting there. I had just come by after work. And so we were just sitting there looking. It's so funny and like storybook to say this, but we were literally sitting on the porch looking up at the stars while we were chatting. So like hilariously storybook.
For reference, we were 16, 17 years old.
We were 17, yeah. And so we were 17 years old.
Wrapped
and it's
up
not like
in a blanket.
Yeah, and it was 11:30 at night because I got off work at 11, and I texted to see if I could like pop by and just say hi, and so I just sat and chatted for a while. But I don't remember in what capacity it would have come up or what the conversation would have been about, but I feel like I remember you saying something about it then, and it might have even included your tester that night, but I don't think so, and I might be kind of crossing some wires because it's been a long time now. But the reason I say that is I feel like I have always kind of known that you were diabetic, more or less since we met.
Yeah.
And so pinpointing that first moment was really difficult. What I do remember, though, was one of the first times that you were giving yourself a shot. And it was during lunch at school. And because we would often leave to go get Little Caesars, hot and ready, whatever the deal was called. And so you and I and another friend, probably your friend Heather, if I remember right, because it kind of cycled around for who's going where. But I remember, I have a image in my head of you using your insulin pen in the car really early on in our kind of knowing each other before we started like dating. And so I think that was probably the first direct memory that I have was giving shots, eating Little Caesars.
That's so funny.
So, yeah.
Our relationship starts out with pizza.
Oh, what do you know? We've come full circle.
I do remember at one point like being like, do you want to give me my shot? And it was like this like cool, like, yeah. I do want to do that.
Yes. In fact, wow, you know what? I'm remembering a little bit about this because I feel like there was some interaction because you were in a photography class and I used to go with you to find things to shoot around town. We would drive around and do things. And it was in that context that I remember you asking, because we stopped to get like some fries or something from Wendy's while we were out and about. And you were pulling out your supplies, your pen and your tester kit thing, as it was at that point. And I remember you asking me that, and it was surprising, and it was like, it was super cool. Frankly, I was like, really? Yeah. Like, can I? Like, I don't know. Is that okay? Like, this is such a weird thing for me to kind of negotiate. But I do remember I have like tactile memory in my hands of feeling the cold backside of your arm, for one thing.
They're always cold.
Because the back of Melissa's arm is always cold. I remember like using one hand to kind of frame where I was giving the shot, and then the feeling of the click, because there's like a click, 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 click. That the insulin pens, because you twist the pen
right,
and it
to like go
sets the amount. But I remember the feeling of the click through my thumb, click, 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 click into your shoulder. But yeah, that jab, I had never given a shot before.
It's kind of interesting. That is kind of a scary thing. I mean, a lot of times it's the doctor giving you a shot. And so then you walk into this realm of like putting a shot into somebody else. And it is a very weird feeling. I remember, we'll probably talk about this with my family at the hospital, but they talked about having all of my siblings get a shot so they knew how it felt. And I think I will have to check, but I think I at some point gave people shots. Anyway, it's a very weird feeling to give someone else a shot. So that's
I do have a very, very clear memory of the first time I gave you a shot.
All the like clicking.
Yeah, with your Novolog pen. And the blue and orange, dark blue and orange Novolog pen. I have a visual in my head and everything. It's wild.
So are there any other memories you have with other devices or kind of use of devices with my diabetes early on in our relationship?
Yeah. So, we've talked about blood glucose meters, finger prick tests quite a few times on here. One thing we haven't talked about was that I had never had a blood test, a finger prick, like blood glucose test like that before in my life until we met. And so, even though I don't remember exactly the context of when or how the interaction came about, I do remember having my finger pricked and my blood test for the first time. And, it came after having like done it for/with you already.
Sure.
Because we had been hanging out, even if we weren't dating yet. And so, I had obviously given you shots and stuff like we were just talking about, but I don't know if it was that you had like let me actually use the lancet to prick your finger or like getting it ready for you while you were driving because you had to do it while we were driving, that kind of thing, because that's happened quite a lot too. But then you asked, hey, do you want to do it? Like, have you ever had your blood tested?
I'm always asking people, like, do you want to know what it's like? That's kind of a funny thing. I don't know. Maybe I just give people perspective on what it's like.
Totally. Absolutely. Because like, no, I had never done it. And so I was like, yeah, let's do that. That sounds interesting. And
Steve's always game.
But I also had some like little butterflies and stuff because I knew that this thing was going to jab my finger. I'd never
You don't really know what it's going to feel like.
No, you don't. I get it in theory.
And there are different like levels of, what's it like that? I feel like it's always had kind of a leveling of how hard it's going to prick your finger.
Yeah, I mean,
and I always have it turned way up because of my calluses on my hands. And after you've done it so many times, you don't want a light poke or it like won't do anything. So
right, and it also helps if you change your lancet, so it's actually sharp and can poke through. So that might be why you have to turn it up so high. Side note, but so I do remember that first kind of finger prick, and the thing about it that is surprising, because it's not like I've done it a lot since. I've done it a couple of times over these 15 years or whatever it's been now. 17 years. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. How far lives?
But the thing that's surprising still is the way that it continues to throb, and you can feel the finger prick. You can feel the poke long after when it actually happens. Like I could feel it in my finger.
That's funny. I don't feel that anymore.
Yeah. And so
my
it is
fingers are dead.
Because it's a regular practice
like a shock
for
to
you.
your body.
It's not a regular practice for my fingers. And so I could, the sensitivity on that finger was heightened for like a full day. And I could see the hole that was poked there for many days. I don't even know, but it was there for a long time. And so I do remember that feeling, that numbness on the end of my finger. I remember that more than the actual process of testing.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's kind of wild. But in terms of kind of other experiences with devices and things early on, I remember not knowing much at all about how insulin works. I knew some because I had family that was using insulin already at the time. And so it was around, not talked about a ton, but around. And so I was familiar and I knew, and my dad had used insulin years prior as well. But I didn't know at the time really anything about the long acting insulin or the slow release like Lantus, I think it was that you were on at the time. And so in some of those early memories, and this might have even been a year or so later when we were kind of heading to college, and that changed some of the dynamics of my interaction with you/diabetes and all these devices and things. Moving to college was a huge deal, actually. But I do remember having to kind of reorient the way I was thinking about what the medicine was doing, because I hadn't really thought that much about slow release medicines or pharmaceuticals in general.
Sure.
And so there was a kind of, I don't know.
Awakening.
Yeah, well.
That's what it is. I mean,
yeah.
You're kind of all of a sudden realizing stuff that's happening outside of yourself. And I think a lot of that happens kind of when you're growing up in that age where you're finally like, oh, like I'm not the only, like my experience is not what everyone's experience. Yeah. So that's really interesting hearing you kind of talk about how you started thinking about it in a different way when we were kind of spending a lot more time together, visiting each other's houses, in a different way when it's your own place rather than your parents' place. It's just a different kind of dynamic.
Yeah. And, that's when, for example, that's when the whole conversation about the butter compartment in the fridge became part of my understanding of experience with diabetes. Because for those who may not be as aware on this, for people with diabetes, that's not a butter compartment. It is an insulin compartment.
Yep.
Period.
Forever
that's all
since.
it is. That's all it's ever going to be forever in our house. So, and so, we spent, like you said, a lot of time with each other, but also in each other's kind of then home spaces in our apartments. And so I was helping get some of those things from the fridge. I was helping kind of doing some of that for and with you more than I was before. And yeah, so there were a lot of little things in that time that changed dramatically. Even though I know that you had some kind of highs and lows that were a little more significant, not massive, but earlier when we were in high school that last year. It wasn't until we were away at college that I remember having some of those more severe highs and lows that I was directly involved, kind of helping you through the process.
Do you have a specific one you're thinking about during that time?
It's funny that I say that in the context of being away at college because it was during this time, but when we were home visiting at the holidays that I have the most stark memory, because it is one of the most present memories that I have of a serious high blood sugar.
They're very different from lows.
Very different. And it was really jarring because I had never experienced anything to this extent. And it was really alarming. And in that way, I was really lucky that we were also with your family at the time, because they had a lot more experience dealing with this. So when this would have been in December of 2006.
Yep.
And we were at a family party at your Aunt Tammy's house,
Yep.
Tammy and Russ's house. And all of the cousins were in the basement playing a game. And it was a super fun game. And here I am, non-diabetic, playing this Skittle game with no thought whatsoever about the kind of implications of this game outside of what's happening with me.
Hindsight.
Because
Like,
in hindsight,
why was
I'm
I
just
playing
playing
this game?
You know, I wasn't thinking about this in these terms, but the point of the game was you have a big old bowl of Skittles and you pass this big old bowl of Skittles around in the circle and everybody reaches in without looking and takes out 2. If they are the same color, you get to chew what's in your mouth. You pop them in, you get to chew. If they are not the same color, then you have to just let them sit there without chewing. And it is miserable. Hence the game. And it's weird, but this is the game. And so we played this for...
Yeah, and then you have to stop chewing when someone else
gets
chewing.
a double.
Oh, it's so gross.
And so there's all this like game dynamics there that makes it competitive between and among each other.
I think it's like whoever swallows and doesn't have anything. Do you just keep playing?
No, so you
I
keep
don't
playing
remember.
until people can't anymore. So if you can't do
gross.
it, then you're out. So if you have to swallow, if you have to chew, you're out. And so, I mean, we played for a while. I don't even know what the time frame was, but it was not a short game because your family is full of very strong-willed individuals. And but so we played this for quite a while and finished the game and headed home. And as we were going back to your parents' house, it became very clear that all of those Skittles were hitting your system very quickly, and it was starting to skyrocket your blood sugar. It was like a 20-minute drive home. And so by the time we got there, tested your blood, it wouldn't read. It was so high that it literally just said high, and the meter wouldn't register what the number was. And I remember, for one thing, I remember seeing an initial moment of panic in your dad's face. And I think that's one of the things that, and I almost am like crying, like I'm tearing up almost thinking about this, like seeing that. Because that like signal of minor panic in his face that he then quickly kind of wiped away and then started doing, was really jarring and alarming for me. Yeah. I had never seen anything like that on your dad's face before.
Yeah.
We'd known each other for like a year and a half, so we weren't strangers at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I also then started to see for the first time to this extent, the way that high blood sugar has it's almost like one of those salad spinners. When you push the button and it spins the container inside, it just whirs around. It's almost like your psycho-emotional state is put in the salad spinner and whirred around, and watching you go through that was really shocking.
Yeah.
And it was coming out then often as like anger and aggression.
Rage.
Rage is probably a better word for it. But, and I, of course, knew that that's what was behind it. And I was trying to like talk with you and at least maintain while we figured out what to do. Now, the reason why this was so alarming was because, as I mentioned, we were down visiting family away from
about an
school.
hour and a half away.
It's about an hour and a half away, hour and a half drive. And you left your extra insulin up there. You didn't bring it down.
Yeah.
And you had run out. And so everybody was in panic mode. We were trying to decide whether we were going to make a 3-hour round trip to get insulin. And then by that time,
The
like,
pharmacy
risk of
wouldn't give
DKA,
us
like
more.
what in the world? And of course you couldn't just go pick it up
Yeah.
because the insurance isn't going to cover extra insulin.
Yeah, it was going to be, I don't know,
Outrageous anyway.
$500 or something like that.
Whatever it was a ton. And at that point, it didn't matter that it was a ton.
Yeah.
And that's what we ended up doing. And I think it was your brother that ended up leaving to go do it. It could have been your dad, but
I think Christopher ended up buying it for
going
us
and doing it. And so
helping us out because it's not like we had $500, you know?
right.
So it was really...
And so, but I remember like almost having to, I remember physically having to stand in the doorway because you were in a rage trying to push your way through to go and do it yourself. Right? Like,
well, I was fighting because I was like, let's just drive to Logan and get it. Like, let's just do that. And I mean, when you're in that state of feeling guilt about doing this playing this stupid game when I knew I shouldn't have played it.
yeah.
And the guilt and shame of that, even now talking about it, I'm like, ugh, like this is embarrassing. Why did we play this game? Like how stupid. And you know, I really like hearing kind of, we've never talked about how you felt during it and what you like observed. That's really interesting with my dad and kind of the observance of the emotions of something like this happening.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm sure that there was a little bit of the, that realization of why did you play this stupid game in his face too. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't the point though. It was just panic mode. We've got to take care of this right now, because the truth is at that high of levels, you're at the risk of DKA, and it's so scary. Yeah. And I didn't have any of that context for what DKA is and what that can mean for people at the time.
I don't think I really did either, you know, going high and stuff like that. I don't know. It's funny when you're young, you just don't think about like implications. You know, I'm high, I'll come down. Like that's kind of all you think. So I don't even
the insulin.
Yeah, I don't even think I really
right?
thought about like DKA, honestly.
No, I mean, I hadn't even heard that term until
I don't know if I
later.
had when I was, being a diabetic, which seems crazy, but
yeah,
you hear what you hear when you're young.
Yeah.
So in talking about highs and lows, there are a lot of those scary moments, those intense emotional experiences. Yeah. And there's also experiences that are kind of funny or bizarre or
a little less harsh, because that was a really harsh one.
A little less emotional. But so is there an experience you want to talk about that you remember that is funny or memorable in some way?
Lightens the tone just a touch for a minute.
Lift our hearts a little bit.
I mean, there are a couple of things, and there are very different contexts that I think come to mind. One of the first things that I have found, I don't know, like a little bit heartwarming isn't exactly the right word, but like kind of is some of the stuff with the kids, because I remember both Harper and Henry doing this at different times where they have kind of like mimed the actions of putting on an insulin pump site and or like walking around with something on them, and so that it was like their insulin pump, you know? And I remember seeing that from Henry sometime fairly recently in the last year anyway. And just watching the way that kind of realization is happening in their minds, and in the way that they are working through this like deeply embedded part of you and your life for themselves, they're getting it. you know, like they're getting it.
Yeah. Are you
in
low,
the way they
Mama?
can. Yes.
Can I get you juice? It's like they're so little, but they're sweet little like voices in wanting to help and wanting to, you know, I think that's a big part of living with someone with diabetes is wanting to help and carry the load.
Yeah.
Because I know, at least for me, I know how that feels when you just want to help and want to do something to help.
Because in a literal like physical sense, you can't. Because what's happening is in your body, it's not mine or anybody else's, and so it can't. And so some of the peripheral stuff, that's all that I can do in that regard. But they're getting it too. Like they're seeing it, they're doing it. The way that Henry will kick you in bed if he comes in early in the morning, or the way that Harper will say, Mom, your pump's going off. Mom, wake up, your pump's going off. That is, it's fun to watch them do that, right? Because they are invested in it in a similar way that I am, right? Because it's those sides of the experience that we have any kind of like role in. And so it is kind of fun. I also remember some time when Henry got a hold of some of your supplies when you were changing your insulin pump, and one of the inserter needles was still around. And so there was like this moment of panic, like, do not jab yourself with that inserter needle. This is not okay. But yeah, I think doing some of that has been, like observing some of that has been really complicated what kind of living as a family alongside diabetes has meant, because it's very different than it was when it was just the two of us. Yeah. It has changed a lot. One of the other things that I am thinking of too was at one point your insulin pump died on you, and you had a few days in between when you were waiting for them to send a replacement. It was still under warranty, luckily, and they sent one that was an annoying color because that's all they had now, because they were transitioning to a new product and blah, blah, blah. But for a couple of days before you had to send back the old one, we still had that, like the second pump, the old one.
Oh, yeah.
And so this was fairly early on in some of my like research work. And so
I forgot about this.
It was in the summertime, and we decided that I would do a brief partial kind of autoethnographic experiential like research thing and wear a pump for a full cycle. It was broken and there was no battery in there, so that there was no injection, because obviously I can't actually do that part. Right. But I did wear the pump for like 3 days, and I remember the way that kind of changed some of my like perspective and understanding of things. We went to the swimming pool and I had a pump site on,
we have a picture of you like lounging in it. Linked in show notes.
Well, I guess maybe we will. I mean, yeah, it's probably up on my Instagram somewhere. I'll have to do that. But like, I remember waking up in the morning and the two tubes being intertwined in the bed and stuff. So, having that little snippet of experience of being connected, even though it wasn't injecting, was certainly something that changed at least a little bit of the way I understood some of that material experience that I hadn't really understood yet. So
I love that. I just remember being like, where do we put our pumps? Because I kind of just set mine out. Because if I put it like in my pants or in my underwear or something, then it's not as noticeable when it buzzes at night. So I always just put it like set it next to me, and so I remember us kind of setting them next to
each other.
It's like
Yes.
this hilarious like
Pump
sitcom
buddies.
moment where it was like, let's set our insulin pumps next to each other.
Listen, hey, you just pitched a show right there. No. Diabreadic. I can't see that. I can't take credit for that word though, because I think someone has like an app or something titled that.
Sure.
So don't sue us.
Our millions of followers, you know.
Yeah. Oh, so many. The reach of this thing is just gonna really cut into their market share. Sorry. So
in talking about our experiences kind of side by side, is there an experience, I guess, with this interview process? What I'm most interested in is how we have these shared stories about lows or highs or experiences, and we remember them in our own way. And I think it's fascinating. Over the years with my family, we've talked about these sort of famous stories, these famous low stories that have been told a million ways, a million times. And it's interesting to hear different sides of the story because everybody has the way that they remember it. Obviously, when I'm low, especially with things like this, I only remember certain bits of it, and I am in and out of consciousness, and the feelings and emotions that go into that sort of experience are vast. So, is there a story, a low story in which you want to have this conversation about? We can kind of talk back and forth about what we remember and how that sort of played out.
Yeah, there are a few of them, and I feel like we have probably referenced at least two toward some of these. And it's hard to know exactly which of these two I'm thinking through that I want to talk through here, because one of them I think is one of those that you're referring to that's like the big low stories that will forever kind of have a place in family lore, and for a good reason. But it's also like the hardest thing for me to talk through.
Yeah.
Because it was,
I'm here with you.
in a literal sense, one of the worst experiences of my entire life. It was horrible.
Yeah. Do you want me to open it up and start talking about it?
Sure. Yeah.
To help kind of ease into it.
Let's do it.
Bear with us as we walk through this. Obviously, it is emotional and probably triggering. So, so this was probably 2016, early 2016.
It was in March.
And I was working at a retail store, and I was newly pregnant with Harper. So this is before we had kids.
Yep.
And I was working at the mall, and I had been kind of going low all day when pregnancy does weird things to your body. And at the beginning of my pregnancies, I'm always just dropping, dive bombing, low,
constant,
low all day long. And so, I always have things on me, juice and extra things. And it was like this, all the things that could happen happened. I was low. I ran out of test strips. I'd used my last test strip. I was sort of in that, I think like 80 range. That's kind of, but I was feeling low. So I was like, crap, I'm going to probably go low. So I was leaving work. It's about 9:00, and we wanted to have BLTs for dinner.
Yeah.
And we didn't have bacon, and we didn't have a lot. I think we didn't have any. I think we had bread. But it was like BLTs. That's what we want to have.
Gotta have BLTs tonight.
I ran across the street to pick up some items, and I clearly was low. And an interesting, during this time, the lows would happen quick, and it would be all of a sudden I am so low I can't function. which doesn't happen usually day to day with my diabetes. But when I was pregnant, it was just like, was happening a lot. So I had called Steve in the parking lot and just said, I'm low. And he's like, okay, grab something while you're in there. And from this point on is very fuzzy in my memory. I remember at the checkout, like really struggling to check out with my card. I am curious what they thought of me during this time, because I was just like,
or if you actually paid in the end.
No, I did. I had a receipt.
Yeah.
So I knew I paid, but then I was like, did I pay? I don't know. It was this weird, like,
yeah.
And I didn't get anything. It's like my brain sort of shut off in that moment of like, I don't know. And I remember getting in the car and looking around in the car for things and not having anything. I remember turning off my insulin pump, luckily. And that's, I mean, I remember a few things kind of intermittently, but that's kind of the last thing I remember from this story for a bit. So,
and so I remember having these conversations with her throughout her shift. So you mentioned that you always take a ton of, you were taking a ton of stuff with you, and you had eaten your way and you drank your way through everything in your bag. And that's what necessitated like, grab something while you're in there, grab a juice or whatever. And so we had this conversation, and this isn't totally unusual. There are many times where we have had conversations while you're at the store and you're saying, I feel like I'm starting to go low. I say, okay, hurry and grab something so you can drink it, and then like have that in your system before you start to try and drive home. That's not an unusual conversation. So we had it. He said, okay, hung up the phone. That grocery store is about a 7-minute drive from our house. So it's pretty close.
Pretty straight shoot, too.
Straight shot. Down the street, take two turns. Boom. Right. And I remember waiting 10 minutes, 15, and it was like, oh, okay. Like, that's a little longer than usual. I better try and call and see what's going on. So I called your phone, and you answered, and I said, hey, and you were talking back to me, but it became really clear pretty quickly that you weren't really taking in what I was saying. And so I was asking you, hey, where are you? And you said, I'm driving. And I said, okay, where are you driving? And you were saying, and it would kind of trail off. I'd say, look around. Do you see any street signs? No. And so I was asking for any kind of like landmarks. Do you see any buildings around you? Do you see any other signs, business signs? Do you see any kinds of houses? Do you see like whatever it is? Trying to get her to describe something, because it's becoming really apparent that she is on the road and can't really understand where she is or what's happening. And so I'm trying to get a sense of where in the world she is at that moment. So we've got a place to start in finding out where you are and figure out what we need to do from there. Doesn't work.
My only memory during that time is like, I think I do remember answering a call from you, vaguely. And I do remember driving and thinking, why am I going? Like, I'm almost home. It's fine. It'll be fine. I'm almost home. And like, I'm on my way. I'm almost home. It'll be fine. That's like what's like playing in my head.
Right.
And then I remember sort of thinking, why am I going so slow? Why is it taking me so long? Why am I going so slow? And that's kind of like
everything that was
what I remember from this whole conversation, which is terrifying. But
and so in this phone conversation, she trailed off. I couldn't get her to answer. So I hung up and called back so that the sound of the phone would kind of catch her attention again. She answered again, but was even less responsive than the last time. And I was I was fairly desperately trying to get any kind of response so that I would have any idea whatsoever where the car could be at any given moment.
Yeah, I mean, we had one car at this point.
We had one car. You were in it, and I also know
late at night too.
Yeah, it was I don't know, around 9:30 or 10 o'clock. So it was dark because it's March, and all I knew was your starting point, and that was on the south edge of town. And that is literally the only place that I knew because that's where the store was. Mm-hmm. And you had been driving in theory for now 20 minutes. And 20 minutes in town, I mean, you could have been absolutely anywhere. And so I was doing everything I could to try and ask anything that could give me any idea and just could not get any kind of coherent response. And I heard the phone thump, and then I hung up and tried to call back and was not getting an answer. And it was at this point that I was starting to panic myself, right? I was starting to feel it before in the conversation, but the panic started to set in, and I knew that I had to, for one thing, hurry and let your parents know that something was happening. Because if I didn't do that in and among a crisis, this is like this family dynamic thing,
Yeah.
right? Especially in relation to like diabetes, but it wouldn't be okay. That's as much as I can really say about why that is. But I knew that was the case, and so I hurried and called them in a panic and explained that you were low and driving away from the store, and I have no idea where you are, and I cannot get you to answer the phone, and I'm losing it. And I remember hearing a little bit of panic in your dad's voice in his response. And then your mom took over the conversation.
Yeah. Which, if you know my parents, crisis, my dad doesn't show a lot of...
in our many years...
emotions in
together,
crisis.
These kinds of crisis moments, not this exact kind, because this was kind of a first in this way, but
yeah.
That kind of shift I hadn't experienced before, but your mom took over the phone and basically said, okay, so you need to hang up. You need to call the police so that they can get people out there. And then you need to try and call somebody else to give you a ride around town so that you can start looking too. That's where you got to start. Hang up and call the police and start it. Yep. And I said, okay. And so I did. And I, in a semi-coherent way, I'm sure, called the police, explained the situation, and they said, okay, we'll send people out around that side of town and see what we can see. I then started calling around town to some of our local friends, which
at 11
at this time, well, and also at this time, many of our friends that we had made here, that we were getting close with, had moved away. Mm-hmm. This is one of the issues with grad school and making building relationships and stuff that's really difficult. Mm-hmm. So you get close with people, and everybody then is moving in a lot of different directions very rapidly.
Yeah.
And so there were very few people in town that we were really close with. And I tried calling several of them and had no answers. And so then I'm starting to panic even more because now I'm stuck.
Yeah.
I was stuck at home in an absolute panic with no way to go and do anything.
Yeah.
And I have never felt so absolutely helpless in a situation in my entire life. It was the scariest thing that I can remember.
Yeah.
And I was about to go into the basement. It's been winter, right? And so I was about to go into the basement and get out my bike and pump up the tires because, again, it's been winter. I haven't been out riding this thing. To set off on my bike into the night to head into the south end of town to try and look.
Yeah.
You know, and I was losing it. And at this point I had called your parents back once or twice, expressing this a little bit and telling them, like that I had been in contact, and they were saying, okay, like they're out there then. And that means that they're doing what they can. And, sometime later, I honestly don't even know I don't remember the exact time frame.
Well, it probably felt like a million years.
Felt like eternity. And it was probably closer to about an hour.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, an hour of having
crisis.
Zero idea of where you could be and knowing that within that hour, severe lows can produce comas and like it can be really scary.
Let alone I was in a car. So.
And you were in a car. And so who knows what that could result in then.
Yeah.
And so, but I got a call back then finally from our friend Renee, who lives in town. And I am certain that she could hear as soon as I said hello, what was going on in my voice. But I explained the situation and she was like, okay, I'll be right over. I will pick you up and we'll go. We'll see what we can do. And
yeah, she was clearly in bed and
oh yeah.
I mean, she's
totally
one of our closest friends and both of our friends that we know mutually. So
yeah. So
her panic too in the like moment of like, you know, one of my best friend is in crisis.
Absolute
and
crisis mode.
Like, let's do this.
Yeah. And so as she was about to pull up to the house, literally I could see the headlights. I was waiting in the front yard to jump in the car and I could see the headlights starting to come down our street. I got a call from the police saying that they had found the car and had found you. And so as she pulled up, I was getting the information of where they said. And so I was in like through my tears and finishing up this conversation, then telling Renee that we need to head south on 38 because they found the car south of town. Now, what that means is that in your lowness, you turn the wrong way out of the parking lot.
Yep.
And so, you know, here I was under the assumption that you had turned and then were somewhere in town, but you had literally gone out of town.
Which is honestly better because there's not stoplights and traffic and, you know, I had basically...
Businesses, people, walking, none of that.
I had basically pulled over into a median and had my foot on the brake.
Yeah.
Passed out.
Yeah. And we're talking Midwest medians. And so it's it's a ravine, basically. Yeah. It's a like grassy, weedy divot in between a divided highway is what it is. And so we zoomed south of town, and as we pull up, the like police and ambulance that are there now are like, hey, sorry, like we've got someone we're dealing with. And I said, no, that's my wife. Like, so they brought me over, and they explained that when they got there, I think it was a police officer that got there first, and then the ambulance came soon after. But the officer actually had to reach in and put the car into park because the car was still in drive, but you had pressed on the brake with your foot and then passed out. And so somehow stopped in this median where there are no cars driving at you.
Yeah.
And he had reached in and put it in park before before they pulled you out and got you on the stretcher and that stuff into the ambulance. But I remember them like bringing me up into the ambulance, and it was right at this moment as you were coming around because they had given you the glucagon. And it had obviously been a few minutes and you were there. You were coming back around, and I could hear you kind of semi-coherently starting to talk with them. But when our eyes met, my panic sobs were already like in my face, and it set yours off.
Yeah, and there's this interesting moment of after being low and waking up that is really scary and emotional, and you kind of forget everything. And so you're waking up and you're starting to realize, I'm a human being. And then I see Steve's face, and I had never seen Steve's face like this. And I could see, he'd been crying and emotional. And then it was just like the fear of like, what's happening? I'm in this ambulance and people are talking to me, and it's sort of this weird, it is unexplainable. I tried to explain it the best I can, but sort of like you're waking up for the first time, or, this, I don't know. It's this weird phenomenon of all these things that you all of a sudden feel.
Yeah.
The fear of like, where am I? What's the last thing I remember? What has happened since? And this sort of like, and I'm realizing before Steve had stepped in there, they were talking to me about, do you know who you are? Do you know? Right. And I was like thinking like, oh, okay. And then I was like, oh, I'm pregnant. Like, is the baby okay? Like remembering that was a thing. And then I was like thinking about Steve, because I think that came to me first, like, Steve, where's Steve? And I was asking where, and they were saying, he's coming. And I'm just sort of remembering as we're talking about this. We don't talk about it a lot because obviously it's emotional. And anyway, so that moment of, you talk about our eyes meet and then we both are just sobbing because it's like this, comfort of the person, your person. And after this traumatic experience of, it could have been so much worse. It could have been deadly.
It was a really
could have,
close call.
There's so many things that could have happened. Just thinking about being, looked over. Yeah. It's at this thing of like, someone was watching out for me that day because, there's so many terrible things that could have happened, and I'm just so lucky that it didn't.
Very lucky.
We, they let us go home, and Steve drove in the other car. I rode with Renee, and I just sobbed the entire drive home. I just sobbed.
Yeah.
And all those feelings that we talk about, the guilt and the feeling of like that I caused so much pain and fear, and, just the feeling of coming up from a low is really bad too. Like in your body, you're shaky, and then you get cold, and then you like it's really crazy. Anyway.
Yeah. And it also is kind of funny, not necessarily funny, haha, but you mentioned the realization that I'm pregnant.
I'm a human.
That didn't and I'm pregnant. That in and amongst all of the panic and the freak out, when we got back there to the ambulance, I didn't even think to bring that up. It didn't even cross my mind. I was just one track mind, getting in there, seeing you, making sure that you were okay. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until Renee, who was standing outside of the ambulance, turned to one of the the EMTs and said, "Oh, hey, also she's pregnant." I don't know if she probably hasn't told you because she's been low.
Yeah.
So that hadn't even been part of the conversation until Renee, who had her feet a little more on the ground at the moment,
Thanks, Renee.
was like, "Hey, by the way, keep this in mind."
And then we brought Renee back to our house that was like tornado, like
Listen,
dishes in the sink. And then we sat there and Steve made me a BLT because I needed to eat something.
Yep.
And so now BLTs
They kind of carry a little bit of
carry a little bit of emotional weight.
Bit of the tone of this night. So they'll be forever associated with this experience.
So, I mean, amongst talking about traumatic stories like this, it just kind of further solidifies to me the experience of living alongside it, because you are living it too. And obviously you're not living with diabetes, but you're dealing with all of the emotions and fears and stresses of, the aftermath of something like that. These things don't happen a lot. For some, they may happen a lot,
sure,
honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to kind of talk through how that kind of changes your perception on life and on like your relationships with people. We kind of laugh a lot. My parents are always nervous if I'm alone, if Steve goes somewhere, they've flown out to be with me if Steve's gone to conferences. Yep. And I think that's sort of that, like, what if? And if you think too heavily on that, it is terrifying because,
for sure,
I'm alone with my kids a lot. I am, in charge of these little humans. And that's kind of scary too, thinking about what could happen if you have a low. And I've had those moments when I'm in the car with them. And ever since this experience, I think I have a very more like, I don't even know how to talk about it, but like, It's like, okay, drink something, even if it's something you don't want to drink. Because a lot of those, like, grab something on the way out, they don't have juice in those things. It's always soda. And like, chugging soda is horrible.
Ow, it hurts.
Sprite is kind of the go-to if I have to do something out of the case at the entrance of the store. Mm-hmm. It's always like Sprite, which like,
Sprite. Yep.
Let me chug this, it'll make me spike.
Ow,
ew, like
it hurts my esophagus.
But so I think that's sort of when something happens like this, it kind of changes you and changes how you think about when you're low. And that doesn't mean that when you're actually low, you actually remember those things, because when you're low, you don't remember anything, and sort of, I don't know.
Yeah. And I think for me too, this is in many ways a one-off. But it's also true that I feel like these moments are kind of amplified examples of how intertwined like my life and experience is with yours as someone directly kind of involved as a like care person in relation to your diabetes, because most days it's not that. Most days it's elbowing you when your pump is going off in the middle of the night,
going downstairs to get
a cup of juice, because it says I'm like 75. Speak of the devil.
That's hilarious.
There it is. People always present.
Oh, replace battery. That's an exciting alert.
Yeah. It's not even an alert about your needs. It's about the needs of the pump. Anyway. Yeah. And so for me, I think I just have over the past several years, obviously been thinking more intellectually about this, but what becomes clear is the more I think intellectually about this, the more it becomes, the more I'm aware of the way that I am mentally and emotionally involved in this, and like psychologically, not necessarily intellectually, and that has deep implications for kind of relationships in general.
Yeah. Thanks for being with us with this first episode of Highs and Lows, and listening as we talk through some of these stories and experiences. I think it's a great way to kind of experience things through other people's stories. And that's what I find most fascinating about listening to podcasts in general. So I thought this would be a great way to kind of work through some of the things I'm thinking about and talk to people I love about how my life affects theirs. So,
and vice versa.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you bringing me on as the first guest.
Thanks for enduring the questions of emotional difficulty.
It's difficult, but I'm glad that we had the conversation because, like you said, some of these are things that we haven't talked about in these ways. And so I really appreciate it. But thank you all very much for listening. Go ahead and like and subscribe wherever you are listening to this podcast, and follow us on Instagram. Go over and like us on Facebook. We have a lot of kind of material going up there, and let us know what you thought of this episode. If this is a mini series that you look forward to catching these future iterations of.